God's story, God's promise to Abraham. So part of God's story is about a promise God made to Abraham, and it begins like this. Once there was a guy named Abraham. He had a wife, Sarah. They didn't think they could have any kids, which was a major disappointment because they really wanted a family. But little did Abraham know that God had a very special plan for him. When Abraham was 75 years old, God promised to give him kids, and one day God would send the rescuer through his family. All God asked was that Abraham and Sarah leave their home first and follow him. Now, they had a tough choice to make. Leave all their friends and trust God, or stay comfortable. This was not easy. See, Abraham really wanted kids, but was already pretty old. Sarah was getting up there too. Not to mention, she had never been able to get pregnant. So if Abraham and Sarah were going to leave their home and trust in God's promise, they had to believe that God would do something that seemed impossible. The good news is, they decided to trust that God would keep his promise. That's always the right choice. So Abraham and Sarah moved from their home to a land called Canaan. Right away, God reminded Abraham of his promise. He said, "I will make your children like the dust of the earth." Can specks of dust be counted? If they can, then your children can be counted. This was God's funny way of telling Abraham he would have a lot of kids, because nobody can count every piece of dust. Well, this promise seemed great, but after a while, Abraham and Sarah still had no kids, let alone as many as the pieces of dust. Now, they were really old. Sometimes God doesn't remind us of his promises because he wants us to learn to trust him. But God took Abraham outside at night and told him to look at the stars. He reminded Abraham that he would give him that many kids. So Abraham decided to keep believing God. He and Sarah waited again. After more years, he got impatient. This time, God told Abraham, by next year, Sarah will have a son. But by now, Abraham was 99 years old. He and Sarah had both given up on having kids and God's promise. In fact, when Abraham told Sarah what God said, she laughed. It's probably not a good idea to laugh at God's promises, but Sarah was tired of waiting and had stopped trusting. The great thing is, even if we think it's impossible, God really does keep his promises. And just like God promised, Sarah got pregnant the next year after Abraham's 100th birthday. When her son was born, she named him Isaac, which means laughter. Sarah said, "God has given laughter to me. Everybody who hears about this will laugh with me." And think about it. A really old lady having a baby is pretty funny. God kept his promise to give Abraham and Sarah a son. Even though they didn't think it was possible, it was easy for God because he can do anything, including giving old people babies. And remember how God was going to give Abraham as many children as the stars in the sky? Well, Isaac grew up and had children who had more children who had more children. This kept going and going and going. And guess who eventually was born in Abraham's line? The rescuer himself, God's son, Jesus. All because Abraham followed God and trusted God to keep his promise. And that's the story of God's promise to Abraham. So in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Abraham and Sarah were old. God promised to give Abraham kids. Abraham and Sarah waited. They got impatient. God reminded them he keeps his promises. Abraham and Sarah waited more. They got impatient again. God told them Sarah would have a baby. Sarah laughed. She had a baby. Jesus was eventually born into their family. God always keeps his promises. And that's a part of God's story.
Hi there, you little chicken nuggets. It's me, Carl.
And I'm Cassie.
And welcome to Grow TV.
Welcome to Grow TV. Introducing your host, Carl. And your co-host, Cassie. Where we learn, where we grow, and we talk about Jesus. Once again, welcome to Grow TV.
Cassie, how have you been?
Good. Pretty busy, though. How about you?
Well, same. What have you been busy with?
I've been reading a lot about Noah since we talked about him last week, and I really like that part about God making a promise to him and his family.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts too. God's promises are really cool.
They are. I just hope I can get a promise for myself one day.
What do you mean?
Well, I've never gotten a promise from God.
Sure you have.
I think I would know, Carl.
Well, think about all the promises that are in the Bible.
I know, there are some cool ones, but I don't think they're for me. So that's why I'm waiting for my promise.
Wait a second. I think we need to play a game right now.
What game?
It's called Promise or Not.
How do you play?
Well, it's easy. I'm going to read off some promises that are in the Bible, and you're going to have to figure out whether or not it's a promise for you or not. Got it?
Got it.
All right. Let's do Isaiah 40:29. God gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak.
I don't think that's for me.
All right, round 2. James 4:7. Submit yourselves to the Lord. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you.
That's a tough one, but I'm gonna say not for me.
All right, third and final round. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life.
Now I've heard that verse before, but I don't know if that's a promise for me, so I'm gonna say no.
Okay, well, let's look at the scoreboard. We gave you the 3 promises from the Bible. You chose that 0 of these promises are for you. So let's see if you were wrong or right. How many of these promises were meant for Cassie? Whoa, all 3! Isn't that incredible?
I guess, but I don't know. I just don't know if that makes any sense.
I can understand that can be confusing, but when promises are made to God's children, that means all of God's children. Remember Abraham?
Abraham from the Old Testament?
Yep. God not only promised that he would take care of him and his family, but that his legacy would continue forever.
So God made him a specific promise?
Yep, and that promise wasn't just for Abraham, but it was for his kids, and their kids, and their kids, and their kids, and their kids. Basically forever. And that's the cool thing about God.
I guess you're right. It's pretty cool that God's promises are for now and for later.
And you know what's even cooler?
Ice cream.
Yeah, well, no. That does sound pretty good. But what I was gonna say is...
Polar bears. They are pretty cool.
What? No, I was gonna say that's our big idea.
Our big idea is polar bears?
No, the other thing.
Ice cream. Yay, that's our big idea.
What? No. Okay, this is getting out of control. Just roll the big idea intro.
Today's big idea is polar bears holding ice cream.
What? Oh, man, this show is going off the rails.
Sorry. This week's big idea is God's promises are for now and for later.
So on the count of 3, let's all say it together. Ready?
Ready.
1,
2.
3. God's promises are for now and for later. Woohoo! Good job, everyone. That was great.
So this was a good day.
Sure was. I'm glad you now realize that God's promises are for you now and for later.
Yeah, I'm also really excited too.
For what?
For the polar bears eating ice cream, of course.
Are you kidding me? There's no polar bears in Florida. It's way too hot, first of all, and secondly, I'm kind of terrified of polar bears.
Thank you for watching, and tune in next week for a new episode of Row TV.